Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
You know, I love getting all your excerpts, and today's is super interesting about jhanas, those stages of deep concentration in Buddhist meditation, and you're really looking for a practical approach to navigating this whole map thing without getting lost in all the details, and especially you mentioned struggling with distractions during meditation, and I think we all struggle with that, so I'm really curious to see how jhanas could help with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic place to start. You're right. Jhanas are these profound states of absorption that we cultivate through meditation.
Right.
And they're seen as these key stepping stones in a lot of the Buddhist traditions. But, you know, it's not just about reaching some blissful state. The real kind of treasure lies in using them as a tool for deeper understanding. Like, I think of it as like upgrading your mental operating system.
Oh, I like that.
To run smoother and more efficiently.
Yeah, like getting rid of all the bugs and...
Exactly.
Yeah, get rid of the glitches. Nice. So it's less about forcing ourselves to reach these jhanas and more about understanding how they can help us kind of navigate the inner workings of our minds.
Precisely. One of the core concepts that came up in the excerpts that you sent was this idea of the observer, that this part of you that can witness your mental processes without getting like totally entangled in them.
Right.
So imagine you're like completely engrossed in a movie, right? To lift your mind, you become aware that you are watching a movie in a room on a couch, but you're not getting caught up in the plot.
Okay, yeah.
You're just kind of like taking a step back.
That's a great way to visualize it. So how does this observer tie into the whole challenge of distractions that you mentioned earlier?
So that's where it gets really interesting. The observer becomes kind of your secret weapon against these pesky distractions.
Yeah, okay.
So instead of getting swept away by every little thought that pops up, you can notice it, arise, acknowledge it, and then gently guide your attention back to your breath, which is like your anchor in meditation. You're not suppressing the distraction, you're just recognizing it as a passing mental event.
Gotcha. So it's like having an internal air traffic controller guiding our attention back to the runway of our breath.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial point that came up in your excerpts, which is that the jhanas aren't just this abstract concept. They actually have specific factors that can deepen our understanding of this whole process.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about these jhana factors.
All right. So think of them as ingredients that combine to create these profound states of concentration.
Okay.
For instance, vitarka and vikara, which are often translated as initial and sustained thought. These are key in the early stages of jhana. They represent the directed focus and analysis that's needed to stabilize the mind.
Right.
As you progress through the jhanas, these factors might fade.
Okay.
As deeper states of absorption, characterized by piti or rapture and sukha, this deep sense of contentment emerge.
This is starting to feel a bit more technical than I'm used to.
Right.
What's the practical implication of knowing about these factors?
That's a great question.
Oh.
So by observing the presence or absence of these factors during your practice, you gain valuable insight into the quality of your concentration.
Okay.
Are you caught in excessive mental chatter, or are you experiencing a really peaceful, unified state of mind?
Right.
This awareness lets you skillfully adjust your approach.
I see. So it's like having a dashboard to monitor our internal state during meditation.
Exactly.
But you know, there's this other concept in these excerpts that I'm still trying to grasp, this idea of lifting the mind without losing concentration. It feels a bit paradoxical. How do you actually do that without completely derailing your meditative state?
$1 million question.
Right.
And it's definitely a skill that takes practice. The excerpt uses this image of lifting the mind slightly above its object, like gently pulling a hand out of a glove.
Okay.
You're still connected,
Okay.
but there's this little bit of space that allows you to observe without disrupting the flow.
Okay, I'm starting to visualize it now. But how does that translate to like an actual meditation session? Could you walk me through it as if I'm experiencing it right now?
All right, so imagine you're meditating on your breath,
Okay.
fully immersed in the sensations of each inhale. Inhale and exhale. To lift your mind, you gently expand your awareness to include the fact that you're aware of the breath.
Okay.
It's a subtle but profound shift. You're not analyzing the breath or judging your concentration. You're just noticing the awareness that's experiencing it.
So it's like becoming aware of the awareness itself.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty mind-bending.
It is. And this observation should be done with a really gentle, curious attitude.
Okay.
You're not scrutinizing or criticizing yourself.
Right.
You're approaching your experience with openness and a spirit of exploration.
That makes sense. But in the excerpts, there's also this caution against getting fixated on labels and stages.
Right.
How does that tie into the observation you're describing?
So that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
The map of the jhanas is a guide, not a rigid rule book.
Right.
Your personal journey through these stages might look totally different from somebody else's.
Okay.
It's more about noticing the subtle shifts in your experience than forcing yourself into a predefined box.
So instead of chasing after a specific jhana, we should just focus on being present with our experience and noticing the qualities of our concentration.
Exactly. And the excerpt suggests that if you reach a promising state of concentration, simply try to maintain it without labeling it right away.
Okay.
See if you can reproduce that same state in your next session.
Okay.
It's about testing its stability and reproducibility, not getting caught up in a one-time experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like trying a new recipe, you wouldn't judge it based on the first bite alone.
Exactly.
You'd want to see if you can consistently recreate those delicious flavors.
Precisely. And as you gain more experience, you can then use those mental post-it notes, the labels and descriptions of the jhanas to sort of map your own inner landscape. But always remember, the most important map is the one that you create through direct experience.
I love that analogy. It's like we're explorers charting our own unique course through the inner terrain of our minds.
Exactly. And speaking of exploration, the excerpts offer some fascinating guidance on what to do when we hit those inevitable roadblocks in our practice.
Oh, like what to do when we can't seem to settle our minds or feel stuck in a particular state.
Exactly.
This is something I definitely struggle with sometimes.
You're not alone. And the overarching advice is to always return to the observer, our trusty compass in the sometimes turbulent waters of meditation.
So whenever we feel lost or unsure, we shift our attention to the observer.
Exactly.
I'm curious, how does this simple act of observation actually help us overcome those roadblocks?
Well, think about it this way. Instead of getting caught up in the content of our experience, we're simply observing the process of experiencing itself.
Okay.
And this creates space for deeper insights to emerge.
Okay.
We start to see how our minds create suffering through clinging, aversion, and delusion.
Ah, I see. It's not about suppressing those thoughts or emotions, but rather developing a more skillful relationship with them.
Yeah.
Like recognizing them as passing weather patterns in our inner landscape. But how exactly does this process of observation lead to those profound insights that the excerpts mentioned? I'm eager to delve deeper into that.
Oh, yeah. That's where it gets really juicy.
Okay.
We'll definitely unpack that more.
All right. Sounds good. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back to explore that.
Sounds good. So, as your concentration and discernment deepen through practice, you start to see those roadblocks, those disturbances, as stemming from fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of reality. Like, think of it as finally upgrading your mental software to see the world in high definition.
Okay, I'm ready for that upgrade. Can you give me like a concrete example of how this plays out?
Sure. One of the biggest misunderstandings that we often harbor is this belief in a solid, unchanging self.
Right.
We latch onto our thoughts and emotions and experiences as if they define who we are at our core.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's that persistent feeling of I as this separate entity kind of navigating the world.
Exactly. And through deep meditation, particularly through the lens of jhana practice, you begin to see that this sense of self is more like a mirage than a mountain.
Okay.
It's a construct woven by the mind, a collection of ever-shifting thoughts, sensations, and perceptions.
So it's like realizing that the I that we cling to so tightly is like a wave on the ocean. It rises, takes shape, and eventually dissolves back into the vastness.
What a beautiful analogy. And as this insight deepens, you start to experience a really profound sense of freedom. A liberation from that constant need to grasp onto a fixed identity.
Okay.
You realize you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you're not even your body. You're something far vaster and more expansive than any of those fleeting phenomena.
This is all starting to click for me, but I have to admit it's still a bit mind-boggling.
Right.
It's like we're talking about a whole new way of perceiving reality itself.
It is a radical shift in perspective, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is that it's not just a philosophical concept.
Yeah.
It's something that you can directly experience through dedicated practice. Remember, you mentioned struggling with distractions in your meditation. Imagine being able to observe those distractions arise and fall away without getting caught in their undertow, like watching clouds drift across the sky.
That would be incredible, but I'm still grappling with how to actually apply this idea of lifting the mind while I'm meditating.
Right.
You mentioned earlier the image of gently pulling a hand out of a glove.
Right.
I'm wondering, how do we do that without losing the concentration that we've worked so hard to cultivate?
It's a delicate dance, for sure. The key is to subtly shift your attention without disrupting the flow of your concentration.
Okay.
So imagine you're deeply absorbed in the sensations of your breath. To lift your mind, you gently expand your awareness to include the fact that you're aware of the breath.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Yes.
It's that meta-awareness, that noticing of awareness itself.
You got it.
Okay.
It's a subtle but profound move.
Sure.
You're not analyzing the breath or judging your concentration. You're simply acknowledging that awareness is present, experiencing the breath.
Okay, I'm starting to get the hang of this. But the excerpts also caution against prematurely labeling our state of concentration. How do we avoid getting fixated on those labels, especially when we're exploring these different jhanas?
Remember, the map of jhanas is a guide, not a rigid set of rules.
Right.
Your personal journey through these stages may unfold differently from someone else's.
Okay.
It's more about tuning into the subtle shifts in your experience, rather than trying to force yourself into these predefined categories.
So instead of chasing after specific jhanas, we should just be present with our experience and observe the qualities of our concentration as they naturally arise.
Precisely.
And
remember, you mentioned the challenge of distractions.
Yes.
As your concentration deepens, you might find that distractions become more subtle. Perhaps a subtle excitement about reaching a certain jhana.
Right.
Or a fear of losing the peace that you found.
Yeah. Ah, yes. Those sneaky distractions can be quite persistent.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But with practice, you can learn to observe even these subtle disturbances with the same gentle awareness that you bring to your breath. You might notice a tightness in your chest when that excitement arises, or a subtle mental commentary about how good or bad your meditation is going.
This is all starting to feel much more tangible and applicable to my own practice.
Yeah.
It's like I'm being given a new set of tools to work with, not just intellectual concepts.
That's the power of these ancient practices. They offer us these very practical methods for understanding and transforming our experience. And as you continue to explore the jhanas, you might find that certain qualities become more prominent in different stages. For example, the first jhana, often characterized by a sense of joy and rapture, might feel very different from the fourth jhana, which is often described as a state of profound equanimity.
This is reminding me of something from the excerpts, the idea of testing the stability of a state of concentration.
Right.
Can you elaborate on how we can do that in practice?
Absolutely. Imagine you reach a state of deep absorption, a calmness you haven't experienced before. Instead of getting attached to that experience, see if you can reproduce it in your next meditation session.
Okay.
If you can consistently access that state, then you can start to explore it more deeply and perhaps even begin to recognize some of those jhana factors that we talked about earlier.
So it's about approaching our practice with a sense of open-minded curiosity, almost like a scientist in a lab, carefully observing and experimenting with different states of mind.
I love that analogy. And remember, the map is there to guide you, but ultimately the most important map is the one that you create through your own direct experience.
This is making me realize that meditation is less about reaching some final destination and more about embracing the journey of exploration itself.
You've hit the nail on the head. And this journey isn't always easy.
Right.
There will be times when you feel frustrated, distracted, or even bored, but those challenging moments can be just as valuable as the blissful ones if we approach them with the right attitude.
Speaking of challenging moments, the excerpts also touch on the idea that even within a state of deep concentration, there can still be these subtle disturbances.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means and how we can work with those subtle layers of stress or tension?
Yeah, it's like realizing that even in the calmest ocean depths, there can still be these subtle currents and undertows.
Oh, wow.
And these disturbances in concentration, they can be incredibly subtle.
Right.
But they can also hinder our progress if we're not aware of them.
So we're not just looking for blatant distractions like, noisy thoughts or external sounds, but something a bit deeper.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
It's more about noticing those subtle ways in which we might be interfering with the natural flow of concentration.
Okay.
The excerpts use this analogy of clinging to rapture when it's no longer calming, or evaluating the object of concentration when it's no longer necessary.
Could you break that down a bit further? I'm having trouble visualizing what that might actually feel like in a meditation session.
Sure. Let's say you're practicing, and a wave of joyful energy arises, that pity we talked about earlier.
Right. It's a pleasant sensation. But as you move deeper into concentration, that rapture might start to feel a bit overwhelming or distracting.
Okay.
And instead of simply observing its presence, you might find yourself clinging to it, trying to hold on to that pleasurable feeling,
Right.
that subtle clinging. That's the disturbance.
Ah, I see. So it's about noticing when we're adding an extra layer of effort or grasping onto the experience, even if it's a positive one.
Precisely. And it might also manifest as a subtle evaluation of the object of your concentration.
Okay.
Let's say you're focusing on the breath. You might find yourself thinking, my breath is very calm today, or I'm doing a good job concentrating. Right?
Wow.
These thoughts might seem harmless.
Yeah.
They're actually pulling you out of that pure state of observation and back into the realm of judgment and analysis.
This is making me realize just how subtle these disturbances can be. It's like they're hiding in plain sight. How do we sharpen our awareness to detect them more effectively? That's where the power of the observer really shines. The more you practice this gentle, non-judgmental observation of your inner landscape, the more attuned you become to these subtle fluctuations.
Okay.
That's like developing a refined palate. The more you savor different flavors, the more nuanced your sense of taste becomes.
I love that analogy. It's like we're becoming connoisseurs of our own inner experience.
And just as a connoisseur can discern the subtlest notes in a fine wine, you can learn to detect those barely perceptible layers of tension or clinging within your own concentration.
This is incredibly empowering. It's like we're being given a set of tools to become masters of our own inner world. But I'm curious, what's the ultimate goal of all this? The excerpts you shared mentioned that mastering the jhanas can lead to these profound insights and even liberation from suffering. How does that all tie together?
That's the heart of the matter, isn't it? The jhanas aren't just about achieving these blissful states of concentration. They're about using those states as a springboard for deeper understanding and transformation.
So it's not about escaping the world, but rather about changing our relationship to it.
Exactly. Through deep meditation, especially through the lens of jhana practice, we start to see those disturbances we've been talking about as arising from fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of reality.
Okay.
We begin to question our assumptions about self-impermanence and the nature of suffering itself.
I'm starting to see how this all connects. By cultivating deep concentration and using it to observe the mind, we gain insights into the very roots of our suffering. But I have to admit, the idea of liberation from suffering still feels a bit abstract. Could you give me a tangible example of what that might look like in everyday life?
Sure. Imagine you're facing a challenging situation, perhaps a difficult conversation, a health issue, or a financial setback. In the past, you might have reacted with fear, anxiety, or resistance.
Right.
But through jhana practice, you've cultivated a deeper understanding of impermanence. You see that this situation, like all things, is in constant flux. It will eventually pass just as all things do. This understanding doesn't make the situation disappear, but it shifts your relationship to it. You're able to meet it with greater equanimity, knowing that this too shall pass.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective. It's like we're learning to ride the waves of life's challenges with greater skill and resilience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as you continue to cultivate these qualities of mindfulness, concentration, and insight, you begin to experience a profound sense of freedom and liberation from that grip of suffering.
Okay.
This doesn't mean that life becomes a constant state of bliss. Challenges will still arise.
Yeah.
But you'll be equipped with the inner resources to meet them with greater wisdom and compassion.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've explored the map of jhanas, learned about the importance of observation and self-awareness, and glimpsed the profound insights that can arise through deep meditation. I really appreciate your insights on this. It's given me a lot to think about, and hopefully our listeners as well.
It's been a pleasure.
To you, dear listener, we leave you with this final thought-provoking question. What areas of your life could benefit from a deeper dive into awareness and observation? Perhaps it's your meditation practice, your relationships, or your work life. The journey of self-discovery is waiting for you. Take a deep breath and dive in.